Appreciate that. You just have to stay ready. I think that's kind of been my whole career is you got to control what you can control, and that's about being a pro. And you can't always control when you can be out there, who you're going to be out there with, but you got to make it count. And so I did that tonight, but also shout out to my teammates to get me the ball when I was open. So it was a good team win.
One night, one game, 15 broken records. Caitlin Clark didn't just beat Connecticut. She rewrote 3 decades of WNBA history in under 30 minutes on the floor. 9 of those records belong to her alone, and at least one of them has never even been touched by anyone else in league history. By the time the final buzzer sounded, nobody in that building was talking about anything else. Before we get into the record-breaking, we need to talk about the doubt that hung over the entire Indiana Fever season for weeks. Was Caitlin Clark actually healthy? Or was she just gutting her way through games on a bad back? That question followed the team everywhere. Clark had missed time with injury earlier in the season, and every time she came back, fans held their breath, watching how she moved, how she planted on cuts, whether she'd wince after a hard drive. The absences piled up, and so did the worry. But Clark herself wasn't playing that game of doubt. She came out and said flat out that she felt back to myself after 3 straight good games. And that's not the kind of thing you say unless you mean it. When asked about it directly, she talked about how hard it is to find rhythm coming off an injury, comparing it to the year before, where she'd gone through stretches of 4 games off, 4 games on, over and over, never able to settle into a flow. This time, she said, she'd gotten her body back quickly and was finding that rhythm again. Her head coach, Stephanie White, backed it up, not just with words, but with action. For the first time in a long stretch, there was no minutes restriction on Clark heading into the Connecticut game. Think about what that actually means for a team gearing up for a title run. You don't lift the restriction on your franchise player unless the training staff, the medical staff, and the coach all agree she's fully cleared. No hedging, no let's see how she feels in the first quarter. Full green light. That's a massive signal on its own, and it came right before the biggest statistical explosion of her career. Clark's teammates felt the shift too. Kelsey Mitchell talked about Clark's determination, her constant push to be the best version of herself every single night. Aaliyah Boston kept pointing out how Clark's comfort level kept climbing game after game. That's the part fans on the outside couldn't see. From the outside, it was all speculation. Can she really go full speed? Cautious framing from analysts who'd watched her limp through earlier games. But inside the Fever locker room, the mood was completely different. Calm, confident, almost like they knew something the rest of the league didn't. That gap between outside doubt and inside belief is exactly where this story lives. Reporters kept asking about health. Teammates kept talking about rhythm. And Clark kept insisting she felt great, building on each outing one game closer to whatever this was building toward. Nobody outside that locker room knew just how big this was about to get. And honestly, even inside the building, you get the sense they knew something special was coming without knowing the exact number. Mitchell put it simply when asked about what she'd seen from Clark over those past few games. She talked about how big a deal it was for Clark to lean into her body being at its best, even while managing the ups and downs of injury recovery. She credited Clark with still leading the team and putting them in position to be effective, even through the inconsistency. The pregame room had a loose energy to it, the kind you get when a team feels good and isn't forcing anything. Clark wasn't hedging about her body. She wasn't dodging questions with the usual athlete speak about taking it day by day. She sounded like someone who'd already decided the doubt didn't matter anymore. And here's a small taste of what was coming. By the end of the night, Clark's final line read 27 points, 11 assists. We'll get into exactly why that stat line breaks the sport in half a little later, but just sit with those 2 numbers for a second. Clark didn't just tell reporters she was fine. She walked out onto that court and made the entire Connecticut Sun roster feel it, possession after possession. By the time the first quarter ended, everybody in the building understood the health scare was over. What happened next wasn't just a good game. It was proof in real time that back to myself meant something completely different than anyone expected. Forget the individual records for a second, because before any of that, the Fever broke this game open as a team. And Indiana has never scored like this before in franchise history. From the opening minute, the pace was different. Clark caught fire from 3, going 5 for 5 in the first quarter alone. Every possession down the floor felt faster than anything Connecticut had prepared for. You could see it on the Suns' faces, that moment where a defense realizes it's already a step behind. They tried switching, they tried doubling, they tried sitting back in the paint. None of it slowed Indiana down, even a little. By halftime, the Fever had 70 points on the board. 70. That's a franchise record for any half in team history, blowing past their old mark of 64 points set the previous July. And here's the part that really tells the story. Clark scored or assisted on 35 of those 70 points, meaning she had a direct hand in exactly half of everything Indiana did in that half. Every quarter they played, they scored at least 25 points. The kind of consistency you almost never see from a team that's supposedly still finding its rhythm. The scoring didn't stop after the break either. Indiana finished with 123 points, a new franchise record for any game ever, and the third highest total in a non-overtime game in WNBA history. Think about that for a second. 30 years of this league, thousands of games played, and only 2 teams have ever scored more in regulation than the Fever did that night. None of this happens without the bench stepping up, and it didn't fall flat. Tyasha Harris came off the bench and dropped 12 points with 6 assists. Monique Billings added 12 of her own. And between Sophie Cunningham, Grace Berger, and Michaela Timms, the reserves kept the pressure on Connecticut so the starters could actually rest. The bench combined for 31 points, which meant Stephanie White could pull her stars for stretches without watching the lead shrink. That kind of depth is exactly what turns a good night into a full blowout. Sophie Cunningham's role that night was exactly what it's been all season. Not chasing highlights, just doing the steady, physical work off the bench that lets the starters manage their minutes and stay fresh for the stretch run. It's a quieter contribution, but it's part of why Indiana could afford to play this fast without gassing out. The final score landed at 123-88, a 35-point win that stands as the second highest margin of victory in franchise history. Indiana outscored Connecticut in every single quarter, meaning there was never a stretch where the Sun even threatened to climb back into it. And that 100-point output wasn't a one-off either. It's Indiana's 11th game this season scoring 100 or more, which ties a WNBA record, with 17 games still left on the schedule to break it outright. This wasn't a team riding one hot hand. This was 5 players on the floor and a bench unit behind them, all moving in the same direction at the same time. And that kind of collective explosion is exactly the engine that sets up the individual history that was about to follow. Aaliyah Boston made sure this wasn't a one-woman show either. She finished with 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists in only 20 minutes. And here's the detail that really stands out. She actually had more assists than both Kelsey Mitchell and Tyasha Harris through the first half. That's a forward setting up guards, which tells you exactly how much her game has grown as a passer, not just a scorer. Put it all together, and you land on the trio record. Clark's 27, Mitchell's 23, Boston's 22. All 3 hit 20 points in the same game for the 7th time in their careers, and the 3rd time this season alone. That's now the most games in WNBA history, where a trio of teammates has all scored 20 or more, ever. This wasn't Clark carrying 2 passengers. This was 3 All-Stars clicking on the same night, and that's exactly the kind of engine that turns into individual history. Kelsey Mitchell deserves her own spotlight here because while Clark grabbed every headline, Mitchell quietly put her name next to the greats of this league. She knocked down 3 or more threes for the 11th straight game, which now stands as the 5th longest streak like that in WNBA history. Think about what that means for a defense. You can't leave Mitchell open for a second. Not on a curl, not in transition, not on a simple kickout, because she's hitting shots at a pace only 4 other players in league history have ever sustained longer. Defenses already had to pick their poison with Clark running the show. Now they've got Mitchell setting fires from the corner every single night, and there's no easy answer left on the floor. The scoring pace was relentless from start to finish. Indiana came close to pushing the total even higher. Watching the tempo they played at, even 130 points felt like it was sitting right there for the taking. Every possession moved fast, every rotation on defense from Connecticut arrived a half step late, and by the 4th quarter, the Fever were simply running their offense at a level the Sun had no answer for. What made this particular win stand out wasn't just one player's ceiling, it was 3 separate ceilings hitting on the same night, stacked on top of each other. Clark's playmaking opened driving lanes. Mitchell's shooting stretched the floor so far that help defense stopped being an option. And Boston's growth as a passer meant Connecticut couldn't even trust doubling the perimeter without paying for it inside. That's the kind of night that doesn't just win a game, it becomes a reference point. And it's exactly the platform that Clark's individual numbers exploded on top of, because none of what came next happens in a vacuum. It happens because the team around her was clicking at the same intensity she was. 9 of the 15 records from that game belong to one player, and a couple of them have never been touched by anybody in 30 years of this league. Let's start small before it gets ridiculous. Clark now has 14 shots made from 30-plus feet this season, a WNBA record on its own. That's not a step-back three from the wing. That's the logo. That's the kind of shot coaches yell at you for taking in practice, and Clark is hitting them at a rate nobody in league history has ever hit them at. Now climb up a level. Clark has 10 career games with at least 25 points and 10 assists, the most in WNBA history. Sabrina Ionescu is second on that list with 5, not close. Clark has literally doubled the next best guard to ever do it, and she's still only in her 3rd season. Here's where the minutes come in, and this is the part that breaks people's brains a little. Clark holds 1st and 2nd place for fewest minutes played in a 25-point, 10-assist game ever. She did it in 27 minutes against Connecticut. And just days earlier, she did it in 29 minutes against Seattle. She's not just putting up the numbers, she's putting them up and getting subbed out before the 4th quarter even really gets going. Which brings us to the record teased at the start of this video. Clark is the only player in WNBA history to record 25 points and 10 assists in under 30 minutes. And she's done it twice in the same week. Twice. 30 years of this league, hundreds of players, and this exact combination of scoring, playmaking, and pure efficiency has belonged to exactly one person in the same 7-day stretch. Then there's the plus-minus. Clark finished the Connecticut game with a plus 26, meaning Indiana outscored the Sun by 26 points during her time on the floor. Pair that with her 27 points and 11 assists, and she becomes the first player ever with 25-plus points, 10-plus assists, and a plus 25 or better, all in the same game. That's not just Clark scoring. That's Clark scoring while her team dominates every single minute she's out there. Her 3-point shooting stacks right into this too. Clark now has 7 career games with 25 points, 10 assists, and 5 threes made. Sit with that. The rest of WNBA history, every player who's ever laced up combined for 4 such games total. Clark alone has 7. She's not just ahead of the field, she's ahead of the entire field added together. Same story with 20 and 10 assist games this season. Clark has 6 of them. The rest of the WNBA, every team, every guard, every star combined has 6. That's the whole league matching one player. Stat for stat, with 17 games still left on the schedule to pull away even further. And through all of it, Clark is averaging the fewest minutes per game of any 20-point-per-season guard in WNBA history. That's the number that ties the whole night together. Because this isn't a player grinding out heavy minutes to hit these marks. This is someone doing it in less time than anybody else who's ever tried. 9 records, 1 night, and at least 2 of them belonging to a category of 1. None of this came without tension. In the 3rd quarter, things got heated. Clark took contact on a drive, the kind of hard foul that's followed her all season, and a whistle blew right after. Sun guard Sia Rivers said something to Clark following the play, apparently claiming she'd locked her up defensively. Clark shot back without hesitating, telling her to check the scoreboard. Fair point. Indiana led 95-67 at that moment, so the confidence wasn't exactly misplaced. The exchange earned Clark a technical foul, her 7th of the season. And under league rules, 7 technicals in a season trigger an automatic 1-game suspension. So she's sitting right on the edge now, 1 bad whistle away from missing a game, with 17 still left on the schedule. Stephanie White even joked about it after the game, saying if Clark wanted to be strategic about resting up, she could just let the fire fly and take the suspension on her own terms. But White wasn't really laughing about the bigger picture. She talked about Clark's competitive fire being exactly what makes her who she is, and how finding the balance between that competitiveness and staying available on the floor is the real challenge going forward. And that's really the point here. This isn't some separate storyline from the records, it's the same competitive edge running through both. The player who scored or assisted on 35 first-half points is the same player who's not backing down from a guard, talking trash with the lead already at 28. Clark isn't interested in changing how she plays just to avoid a whistle. And honestly, that refusal to shrink is probably exactly why she's putting up numbers nobody else in league history has touched. When asked about it afterward, Clark said she's never going to back down, pointing out that Kelsey Mitchell plays with that same edge, having taken a hit to the eye earlier in the game and refusing to let it change how she competes. Clark talked about trying to control her emotions as best she can while still holding on to that fire because it's part of what makes her who she is as a competitor. At the same time, she acknowledged the balance. Knowing her team needs her on the floor and not wanting that suspension threshold sitting in the back of her mind affecting how she plays. It's a tightrope every competitive player walks eventually. How much edge is too much when a single whistle carries real consequences for the team? But if Connecticut is any indication, Clark isn't planning on dialing it back anytime soon. None of the record-breaking or the edge of suspension drama happens in isolation from the bigger picture building around Clark right now, and that picture just went global. That same week, Clark was named the cover athlete for NBA 2K27's Deluxe Edition. And this isn't some WNBA-only spin-off cover, this is the Global Premium Edition, releasing worldwide, putting her right alongside names like Victor Wembanyama and Derrick Rose. No WNBA player has ever gotten this kind of cover before. Clark called it cool and pretty surreal, and said she hopes seeing herself on a cover like that gets young girls picking up a controller and realizing women's basketball belongs in the same conversation as the men's game. That's reach going way past the league itself, landing in living rooms of kids who've never watched a single WNBA possession. None of the record-breaking or the cover reveal happens without the gritty stuff underneath it, though. Lexi Hull and Monique Billings handled the physical stretches all night, boxing out, taking charges, doing the stuff that doesn't show up in a highlight reel, but keeps the stars able to operate at full speed. Between the technical foul drama and the 2K cover landing in the same week, one thing's obvious. Clark is impossible to ignore right now, whether she's pointing at a scoreboard or staring back at you from a video game case. Picture the walk off the floor that night. 27 minutes on the clock, 27 points, 11 assists, a stat line nobody's produced in 30 years of this league. And Clark did it twice in 1 week. She said she felt like herself again before tip-off, and the box score didn't just agree, it buried the doubt completely. Now look at what's stacking up heading into next season. Clark, Mitchell, and Boston all hitting 20 in the same game, a three-headed offense that finally looks unstoppable, and an MVP case building in real time. This team is just getting started, and with 17 games still left on the schedule, there's real room for these numbers to climb even further before the season is done. 9 records in one night, a trio putting up a historic scoring line together, and a rookie-turned-star refusing to back down from anyone on the floor. That's not just one great game. That's a team peaking exactly when it matters most.